I'm also extremely happy, of course, with the development of this community. Its number has grown, and I think now we have approximately 400 people on the list. That is, of course, one measure of the interest and potential that we have for change or to cause some positive impact. But I think I'll start by agreeing with all of the remarks made by Sarbulan Khan. I think he set the scene very, very clearly. There is a hole there. We do share a lot of common interest, and I think the discussions, especially from the governance track and other knowledge-sharing themes and the conclusions of the GIU, in particular Recommendation 8, calling for a new governance mechanism within the rank and file, perhaps, of the CEB in the long run, is really the direction that we should be focusing on. And what we discussed among ourselves in that context at the conclusion yesterday of the conference was a potential new structure that would essentially be two-tier. And the first tier would be the highest ranking web person within each organization from the entire UN system. And that collective group, we could call it whatever we want, the UN web group or network, would be responsible for deciding on policy, setting the direction, the guiding principles, the basic ingredients of a governance mechanism, to be furthered, of course, and put into practice by different communities of practice in different areas. And this combined structure it's not really new. It's not a new formula. It's one that already exists within the finance world, the HR, ICT, of course. But there are also many other bodies. There's the UN Communications Group, there's UNGWIG, there's GAID, of course, and there are many more different communities that we should be reaching out to. And I think that if we formalize at least one strata of this community, then we have the first building blocks, I think, on which to deliver something. And delivery in terms of impact and visibility is extremely important, because and it's been an undercurrent theme, I think, of all the discussions on the subject, if we don't deliver, we won't have any legitimacy. And if we don't have any legitimacy, we're not going to be recognized and we're not going to be incorporated within any formal structure that exists. And so it is up to us to conclude, I think, this conference with a clear direction on what the next steps should be. And I think that basic structure could be, in my mind, the best conclusion. And how do we go about doing that? Of course, I think we all have to be in agreement here, first of all. I think we all need to go back to our respective organizations and make that point very clearly. There are, of course, within the CB structure, relevant organs that could be informed, but I think it's too early to expect anything in return from that communication. We're not developed yet. We're not ready to be recognized. But I think that if we somehow find a way to communicate, and I hope I'll be involved as well, with each of the web departments in each of the UN system organizations, then I think we can forge a way forward. But first, I think we have to conclude that this is indeed the common consensus of this group and its future. So that's it.
So should we take some questions, or does anyone have anything to add from the panel to that?
Nick? For myself, I'd like to reinforce what Richard was saying with regard to Mr. Khan's comments. I think he set the stage very, very well, that there's not only a tremendous potential in this organization, but that it can fit very well into the overall objectives of the UN and other organizations in making the web a high-level priority, and that it's up to us to take that step forward. And I think we discussed this idea of having a kind of a core group we can work from and through and include the larger community, but at the same time have a kind of structure that makes it easier to make decisions. Not a terrifically restrictive process, but something that at least we know we can work with. So I think that would fit very well with what Mr. Khan was saying as well.
Okay, great. Questions right back here?
Hi. On your approach that you're mentioning, this core group, which I think always helps, to have somebody that are people that are more concentrated. But you mentioned that this will be the highest of the web, the people that are at the top of the web teams. Unfortunately, I think sometimes the person that is leading the web is not the person that's the most enthusiastic about the web. And I think one of the great things about this group is that everybody here cares about two things. They're super excited about the web, about what we do, and they really want to do something with it within this framework of the UN. So maybe restricting it might not be the most dynamic option, but maybe asking people to nominate somebody, nominate this person to represent the organization. So that person not only brings the rank or not rank, but their enthusiasm. So I think that would be something that maybe could be considered.
Does anyone want to respond to that? David?
If I could,
Nick?
yeah, I think that's a good point. And just again, historically, we at one point had a similar system where the membership couldn't be added unless you had within your organization recommendation by an existing member. So I think some level of flexibility rather than saying you have to have a certain function or a certain position would be great, because part of it is people who want to step up and do the work, but it has to be at a level so that they are at some central point in the organization so they can communicate within the organization and serve as the focal point as well.
But
Sure, David.
But I think more than that, also from a leadership committee or whatever you want to call it, it's got to be someone from an agency that has the decision-making power and the power to impact funding and resources. And I think that may, again, not be the most enthusiastic person in the organization, but hopefully when they're surrounded with other people who are enthusiastic and who have a comparative on who's funding what, who makes those decisions, I think that's where most of the impact comes in, as opposed to having focal points within each agency, where the focal point responds back to the agency and hopefully something will happen. So I think that's sort of the issue that we're facing right now, that it's not only the community in itself, the community practice in itself is great for interaction and everything else, but as far as motivation and as far as getting empowerment down to the web teams, it's got to be someone who can impact decisions higher up, but also on resources and funding, because I think that's one of the major things that's missing from most of the teams, is exactly that. A lot of great ideas, and there's a lot of motivation, a lot of enthusiasm and everything else in the community, and coming in from private sector. I mean, we're just as good as private sector. There's no doubt about that. But we have to bubble that up somehow, and somebody's going to have to stand up there and shake their fist and say, we need more funds and resources. So I think that has to be also implied in that decision-making on who, from an agency level, is the participation on that.